And then we find ourselves in certain situations, and it's like, God, is this really you, or is this sent by Satan to destroy us? I mean, it hurts, and it's not an easy path, but I am encouraged to know that at the end, when God finishes with all this stuff that He's removing from our lives, all this pruning that He's doing right now, I know that the reward is greater. This is Shayla Renee, and welcome to another episode of Take Back Your Life Conversations with Shay, where we help women who are ready to turn the corner from past trauma and drama by overcoming toxic thoughts, feelings, people, and situations through a closer relationship with Christ. In 40 minutes or less, every single week, I'll give you spiritual and practical tips that will help you overcome any form of toxicity that may be destroying your life. If you'll make the commitment, stay plugged in, and let's take action. For today's episode, we will be dealing with the question, how do you know it's God doing the stripping? But before we dive into that, I want to thank all of you who are return visitors for your continued support. And if you're new to this channel, please make sure to hit that subscribe button so you're notified when we drop new episodes, which is usually weekly. And if you find anything helpful in this episode, please be sure to share it with your friends and families or anyone that you think may benefit from it. When do we know that it's God doing the stripping, and what do we do about it when it's happening? This question is very near and dear to my heart. It resonates with me because, like many of you who are listening, I've experienced a lot of loss in my life. And some of the things I've lost, it was God removing things out of my life that was detrimental to my well-being. And then some of it was me losing myself in something. I'm losing myself in a job that I'm going to every single day, or I'm losing myself in a relationship that I often talk about. And it's often hard to recognize when the loss is God taking something away, or when the loss is something you idolize taking parts of you away. So think about your own life right now, if that's something that you can relate to, or a question that you find yourself asking yourself. You find yourself asking often, like, why am I always losing? I One of my first major losses that I've experienced in my life goes all the way back to when I was in the ninth grade. And I'm talking about when I losing material things, possessions, not losing a loved one. But I remember, and when I was in ninth grade, we had a house fire, and the fire only affected my bedroom and my brother's bedroom, which was on top of my bedroom. So we were the only two who experienced the pretty much major loss in that fire. You know, from my brother's standpoint, he lost all of his trophies, all of his medals. If anyone knew my brother, they know that he was an avid, he was athletic, and he was at the top of his game in most of the sports he participated in. Now, I didn't have as many trophies and medals as my brother did, but I had a few. I had some basketball trophies. I did judo for a little bit until I had to compete, and then I got scared and I chickened out. But besides losing, a few medals and trophies from sports in that award, I lost all the clothes. All my clothes were lost in this fire. And I was at basketball practice when I was alerted that our house had caught on fire, and I remember looking at the clothes that I had on, and I remember thinking, like, this is not the outfit that I would want to salvage if I were thinking, if this was the last thing I was going to have on. This would not be the outfit that I wanted. There were, you know, tons of, I was a sneakerhead. I lost all my sneakers and, all my clothing except for what I had on my back. And that's the one thing that I remember that stood out. Like, everything I owned, I lost. But more importantly, and I guess the more important thing about this house fire is that no one was hurt. And it's amazing when we are experiencing loss, we often our minds often shift to the things that we are losing and not the blessings that are that we are receiving when we're losing these things. Like, remember recall the story. Now, I was in ninth grade, but I remember, you know what was going on. Our house was being renovated at the time. The water was turned off. When a fire hit, there was no way to really put it out immediately, and which caused, it to burn, and it burned upwards. Like I said, me and my brother's bedrooms were pretty much the only two rooms that were heavily affected. But most importantly, no one was in the house and got injured or lost their lives. And that's important because my mom, even though the house was being renovated, my mom was often there during renovation. She worked night shift, so she would go and lay down during the day, even though the house was being renovated. But that day, she didn't go there. She went somewhere else. So her life was spared. And that is the thing that was the blessing out of that loss that we experienced. So I'm saying all that to say, I know that was a very, very long-winded story, but instead of shifting our thoughts to what we are losing, we got to try to change the perspective and figure out what we're gaining when God is removing things from our lives, when God does the stripping. But here's the thing with that. We often don't know whether or not God is doing the stripping, or if we're losing our lives to some other evil purposes, until after we've come through it. And we don't often know during the process, during this stripping and removal process, whether it's God doing it or whether it's something evil doing it. If we think about the story of Job in the Bible, now, whether you are an avid churchgoer or not, I'm sure you've heard of the story Job. And you know that in this story, he lost everything. And I'm not just talking about the clothes on his back. He experienced a ton of loss. He lost almost everything in one day, one fell swoop. His land, his property, his health, his sons. The only thing that remained after everything was stripped away was his wife, who was on his back to curse this God who would take everything away from him. And he could not understand for the life of him what was going on and why it was happening. And he had people around him trying to explain or trying to conclude why God would take such drastic measures in getting his attention. And they were all wrong. I mean, the story of Job, so entire book, go read it. And none of the people who were advising Job were right about what happened. At the end, because this is not really a video about Job, but at the end, God did the stripping for his purposes and for his glory. And then afterwards, Job reaped the rewards. I mean, everything was restored. His land, his property, his health. He had more children. He was able to look back and understand that God was a keeper and restored him and doubly blessed him. He was rewarded at the end. But going through all that, he didn't think he was being rewarded. And usually when we are going through removal or things are being stripped away from us, we won't see the rewards. We won't see the light at the end of the tunnel, as I often talk about going through it. And we will often question why. And one of the questions is one of the main things that we question is, what did we do to deserve this? I mean, Job's friends were telling him he must have done something in order for God to do something so drastic. It's not unthinkable for us to think when we are going through some things or when things are being removed from our lives that we are attached to, what did we do to deserve this? I mean, we are human. So what do we do when God does the stripping? I remember, I wrote about a little bit about in my book title, He Almost Stole My Life, about when I was in this relationship, God was slowly stripping other things away from me. Well, it may have been slowly occurring, but when the stripping happened, it was pretty much automatic. It was pretty much one fell swoop, I'll say. I talk about my mom being sick and passing away from her illness. Just taken. And then I talk about losing my close friendships right after that. It was just taken. And I couldn't understand for the life of me why God would continue to let so much loss happen to me. And what was I doing to deserve this? Now that I'm, 15, almost 20, almost 20 years out of that relationship and out of that situation, I can look back and say that was God who was doing the stripping, because there was no way I was going to grow spiritually under those conditions. And the one thing that I tried to hold on to, I gripped and I refused to let God take away, was that relationship. And that probably was the main thing that he was trying to take away from me. But I didn't see that was God doing that. Well, I'm telling you a fib. I knew God was trying to take it away from me. I just didn't want him to, because I couldn't see God's glory in any of that. I couldn't fathom any rewards that came with me losing almost my entire identity in one fell swoop. So just for a second, just think about something that you know God is trying to remove from your life, that you have a tight grip on and you refuse to let it go. Just think about that one thing. And think about why you are refusing to let it go. Is it because you don't see the reward in letting it go, or you are afraid to let it go because you think that that's your entire life. I mean, I know for me, I thought that was my entire life. That relationship and my friendships were my entire life. My mom, my entire life. And it's funny, even as I do this video, I think about how much time that I could have spent with my mom had I let those things go that God was trying to remove from my life, but I was holding on tight to, because he knew what was going on. He knew my mom was suffering, and he knew that he was ready to call her home. And I didn't want to believe that. They say hindsight is everything. So, what are some things that you're holding on to that you know you need to give to God because he's trying to take it away from you? Just think about Joseph and the way he was brought up, and being his father's favorite, and being gifted the coat of many colors from his father, and pretty much being lifted above his brothers in their household. And then think about the transitions he had to go through in life, being stripped of that coat, being thrown into a pit, being sold into slavery, being lied on, being sent to prison, and then finally seeing God's glory after many years of everything being stripped away from him. It was so bad that his family didn't recognize him when it came to him offering a blessing to his family. He recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. Yeah, just thinking about not being recognizable after God does the stripping and the pruning. That who you are afterwards is a completely different person than who you were beforehand. It's funny, on social media, I always see these posts about people saying, if you knew that person back then, you wouldn't trust them. Or if you knew some of the stuff that they did back then you wouldn't believe the story. You wouldn't believe who they are now. Or you wouldn't go into a relationship with them, or you wouldn't trust them with your kids, or you wouldn't trust them with your finances. And it's funny because they can only say who they were back then. But through the years, God does some stripping and you become a different person. And this new person, after the pruning and the stripping, is unrecognizable to the people that used to know you. God stripping impurities from you is a process of your walk with Christ, or him pruning you is a process. It's not a fun process, but it's a process nevertheless. In John 15, 1 through 4, from the English Standard Version, it reads, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself, unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. So just to summarize, there are at least two things that you can walk away with, or you should walk away from the reading of this word. One is that your walk with Jesus requires pruning. It requires God taking away, refining some things. I mean, could you imagine being a rose growing and then being pruned and how that might feel. I'm sure if a rose could feel anything, being cut with shears, I'm sure isn't a pleasant feeling. So, this process of God pruning us or stripping away some things from us doesn't feel great, but it's necessary in order for us to grow. So just think about things in you that are not bearing any fruit. This is how you know that it's God taking some things away from you. If the things that you are doing are not bearing any fruit and He removes it from your life, whether it hurts or not, that's God removing this from your life. That's necessary in your walk in order to be a more mature follower of Christ, in order to help others to be one step ahead of someone else that you can reach down and help. He had to remove some stuff from you. The other thing that you need to gain from this is that you have to understand that the difference between when God is doing the stripping and pruning versus when Satan is doing it. Because scriptures say that Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So when he's removing some things from your life, or when he is doing some stripping in your life, on the other side, you don't come out whole. His attempts are for you to fail, to not succeed, to fall into depression, to fall back to alcoholism. Satan's objective is to take away, to destroy you, so there is no recovery. There's no benefit. There's no reward at the end. And unfortunately, oftentimes we won't know the difference until we get to the end. I mean, there are scriptures that talk about the wheat and the tare, and you don't know what's good or what's bad until they've both grown, and then you can separate them. Because when it's being planted, they look the same. It's not until they grow up until they bloom that I don't know, what does wheat do? It's not until it grows and you throw the tare in the fire and it burns up, and then you are able to turn that wheat into bread that you know one from the other. I mean, that's the unfortunate part of life that came after the fall of man. And it's something that we all have to walk through. I mean, if I'm being completely transparent and honest right now, my family is going through some stuff now that, I'm probably like Job's wife inside my head and my heart. I'm like trying to yell at God, like, what is going on here? Haven't we done XYZ? Aren't we faithful to your word? Don't we show God's economy? Don't we give so much of ourselves and our finances that we shouldn't be in certain situations? And then we find ourselves in certain situations and it's like, God, is this really you? Or is this sent by Satan to destroy us? I mean, it hurts, and it's not an easy path. But I am encouraged to know that at the end, when God finishes with all this stuff that he's removing from our lives, all this pruning that he's doing right now, I know that the reward is greater. And I have to lean on that and not on what I'm losing or what I may lose or what we may lose in the process. Because I want to hold on to these things that make me feel comfortable in this life instead of worship worshiping and idolizing or worshiping our Lord and Savior. It's like Moses going up to the mountain to talk to God and coming down and finding that his people done created a calf made of gold because they need something to idolize. Like sometimes we want something to hold on to when we feel like God is distant, or we feel like he's far away, or he's not listening, or he doesn't hear our cry. So we need something tangible to hold on to. We need money in the bank to hold on to that, to know that God loves us and he's there for us, instead of living in faith. I mean, it's not an easy journey, and it hurts and it's hard. And sometimes we don't do anything to quote unquote deserve some of the stripping. But oftentimes it's being done to show God's glory, and so that he will be glorified at the end. So what do we do when God's doing the stripping? I mean, right now in this process, in this journey that we are on right now, what are we doing while God's doing the stripping? I mean, I'm talking to you, but I'm also talking to my husband who's sitting across from me, who is he's the saved and sanctified one. So what are we doing right now in this process? I can tell you one thing, when I often talk about having a good support system around you. So you got to have people that when you reach out to them and say, I'm struggling a little bit, that they immediately go into prayer for you, and they immediately go into encouraging you, and they go and they don't sugarcoat anything. It's good to have a support system around you. I mean, I've talked about that often in videos, in episodes, when especially when we talk about recovery. Like, it's good to have a support system around you, but it's also good to have a support system around you when you are recovered and you're walking your daily Christian life. It's good to have people that you can reach out to that are going to pray for you and put things in perspective and tell you some things that you probably don't want to hear because you want to go wallow. I mean, I'm just telling you from my point of view. I know from reading God's word, reading scriptures, that when people like Job, when people like Joseph, I mean, look at Saul. He was temporarily blinded, and then his whole life was, him in and out of prison. Like, I know that journeys aren't quick from reading his word, and I don't think I like that, but it's true. And one thing remains is that God will be glorified at the end. And that's what's most important. When I lost all my clothes except for the clothes on my back and the outfit that I had on when our house caught on fire when I was in the 9th grade, I immediately went to, this is not something that I want to hold on to, the clothes that I had on my back, instead of going and praising and thanking God that no one was hurt and no one lost their lives in the fire. Because at the end of that, God was glorified. So I'm telling you, when God does the stripping at the end, he will be glorified and you will be rewarded. I don't know what that reward will be, but it will. There are rewards at the end. So that's what you do when God is doing the stripping. You run to him. You don't run away from him. You run to the people that are surrounding you, that will encourage you and will pray for you. You run to his scriptures and see what people who've lost, who were stripped away from things, what did they do? And you try to emulate what they did. When Satan's trying to steal, kill, and destroy, that's a whole nother episode. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Take Back Your Life, Conversations with Shay. Remember that there's always a reward at the end of the stripping. You just got to get there. And it's not always something that you may have done to deserve some of the things that are happening in your life. Thank you all for listening. And please be sure, again, to hit that subscribe button and share this episode for those that you think may benefit from it. Until next time, I'll see you.